You're listening to the Occupational Philosophers with Simon Banks and John Rice.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Occupational Philosophers, a not-so-serious business podcast which mashes together the worlds of curiosity, creativity, imagination, play, with a little sprinkle of philosophy thrown in for good measure. This is an Inbetweener episode, nice, short, sharp burst of delight. And as ever, I'm joined by my co-host and co-producer in Sydney, Australia, Simon Banks. Hello, Simon.
Hello, John. Good to see you. And this is a repeat, or not a repeat, it's a continuation of our previous episode where we looked at our guests' Maniguesto sayings, which we have on our website, which you can check on the About page. And there's so many great insights, and we got such great feedback from that episode. We thought, hey, why don't we just dive into a few more of those and some of their wise sage sayings. And really, it's been the highlight of the show is meeting all these curious cats. So, John.
We should say as well, Simon, that this is obviously slightly sparked by the fact that we did celebrate our 100-something birthday. So it had us reflective. It had us thinking back and feeling a bit nostalgic and looking back to all those wonderful guests and all those wonderful episodes and insights and thought experiments as well. But we'll cover that in a separate episode, I think. Thought experiments.
And we thought rather than doing a 5-point plan on how to be a highly successful podcaster and talking about ourselves, we thought, hey, let's dive into our guest. Way more interesting.
And have you chosen? Because I've chosen another 3. I think you have as well.
Myself as well.
Okay. Well, do you want to kick us off then? Who's first on your list this time around?
John, one which jumped out at me, which I thought was really nice, is Ian Gilbert. Now, Ian Gilbert is a multi-times author. He's the founder of Independent Thinking with an awesome global reputation for being an entrepreneur, speaker, educational thinker. And I love his little book of thunks. Is that what it's called? Yeah, the book of thunks, which are those questions which don't have an answer. So they're not black and white. There's a lot of gray. They're non-binary, if that's the right way to say it. So,
yeah. Shall I give an example? I've got an example because I have the books to hand. Yeah. I always keep them close to me. This one here, is the future closer than it was this time last year? Does a migrating butterfly know its own way? And if a urinal is a work of art, was it a work of art before the artist first laid eyes on it?
Oh, that's a very in-depth one. I like that. Yeah, Marcel Duchamp.
Indeed. So, yes, what is it you like about these, Simon? What was the Maniguesto learning from Ian?
Well, the Maniguesto one was do things no one else does. And I thought that's a really nice thing because I think this is probably a little bit of my own thoughts. You read so much online of do this, do that, follow this plan, do this plan. If you do this, you'll be better at this. So I thought there's a lot of pushing to sameness, a bit like, we sort of laugh at people like, do these 5 things like I do, and you will be as successful as me because I've already done it that way. So I don't know, what might you call them? A thought leader or something? So I really like
leadership. No, we'll stick to thought experiments rather than thought leadership.
But self-appointed thought leader. So I think it's very easy to sell sameness.
Yeah.
So do everything the same as other successful people and you'll be just as successful. So I really like that thing. He's been successful by doing things that no one else does. So, push the boundaries a little. Push
the boundaries.
Stand out from the crowd a little bit. So that was the one which jumped out for me, which speaks to a lot of those things we speak around, which is around playing, being curious, looking at the world with fresh eyes.
And I must say that hopefully we'll have a chance to speak to Ian again. And if we do, we must ask him the actual process which he goes through to actually create the thunks in the first place. Because I suddenly realised there's so many of them that he must just sit there, I don't know, maybe slightly out of his head or something. It's like puts together these random ideas and comes up with a thunk. And then somebody has to go, yeah, that's a thunk. Is there a sort of validation process on thunks?
I'd love to see the
suitable paradoxicness or weirdness. I don't know.
Or someone might go, that's thunkin' awesome, man. So, yeah, I'm going to see the ones that didn't make it that's still on the cutting room floor. Like, what sort of is? Now, one of my aims is to try and fit some thunks into a keynote. So I was aiming for it last week. It just didn't work out. So I've got my list. So I'm going to bring them into a keynote soon. So watch this space. Watch this space. All right, John, that was our first one. Do things no one else does. Ian Gilbert, what about you?
Well, I'm going to go for Mike Parsons, one of the earlier episodes. And Mike is a co-host on a podcast called Moonshots, which we both know and love listening to, where they explore different concepts, ideas, and people who have genuinely done something quite transformational in their own space. And his Maniguesto learning was, if you want to transform the world, start by transforming yourself. And then we kind of sort of branched into what transformation was about. And he shared the idea of, look, don't make it 10% more, make something times 10 more.
Yeah.
And that was the concept, I suppose, really underneath the idea of moonshots. They were so big, so significantly different in what people were striving towards that it had people think completely differently from the outset. So, you know, if it was a 10% improvement, people would go, oh, well, we could cut a bit here. Maybe we could do a little bit more of that, a little less of that. But if you say to them, we've got to improve performance 10 times what it currently is, that puts people in a different mind space or has them asking a completely different set of questions. And I thought that was really interesting because you would then cast away anything that was a little bit sort of a nominal improvement to something that was genuinely a game changer.
So a good way to think about it, your limiting beliefs have a bomb put under them, I would say, in that short moment. And I think as a not so serious business podcast, what a great way to think when you're looking at, okay, what do we want to earn next year? Or what do we want to do? Rather than, the 15% incremental improvement or something. What does like 10 times improvement look like?
Yeah, the moonshot question. I do think it's got to be a great exercise for any team or organization to just at least entertain the idea of moonshot questions. I wonder if we could call them quunks. Why don't we create a book of quunks? And they are moonshot questions.
Ian suing us, for copyright.
10 times over.
Help.
But no, I think that it's curiosity supercharged, as it were. And it is a set of questions that take people way beyond the boundaries that they're currently operating in. Again, not dissimilar, isn't it? Ian was pushing boundaries, do something that other people are not doing. I think there's a similar theme at play there for Mike with this idea of moonshot questions.
And one of your points is often we need to come with better questions rather than answers. So I think a nice way to frame this with teams, what are the questions we need to be asking if we were to 10x this rather than the answer for the 10% improvement or whatever it may be. So, I was thinking a lot about this today, just with my own mindset for what next year looks like. And also what are the things I've really enjoyed this year doing? What, and this is every organization. What are the things I haven't enjoyed doing so much, like the podcast? Just jokes. Okay. But again, I thought, well, what are the questions I need to be asking to 10x those bits I love, rather than the usual stop, start, continue or something, red light, green light. Something along those lines. So, what are the 10x questions?
Who's next on your nostalgic reflections list?
Great question, John. Professor David Cropley, creativity is like spinach. Now, the context for this, if you remember, that's such a great little tagline or a future hashtag. It's not that nice to eat. You got to work through it. It's hard. A lot of people give up on it. However, the end, like the nutrition you get from it, is excellent if you stick with it.
But he was very, very clear that we've always said is that, creativity is hard work. It's not kind of sort of random sort of moments of lucidity and brilliance and genius. It actually takes consistent effort and work and application for actually something magical ultimately to come through.
And think of it, the metaphor of a band making an album. It's a lot of work. They're doing take after take after take. And you have fights on the way and people don't agree. And someone becomes a drug addict and spend 12 months in rehab and all that type of stuff. People smash up the studio. However, I don't know, I'm just thinking like maybe 1970s Rolling Stone album when they were in France or something. That's when my mind went. However, you get to the end of that and all of those ups and downs by continuing to invest in that creative process, you get something in the end that can be quite breathtaking.
Yeah, I don't know if it was meant to be that sort of hard work, though, was it? As in,
heroin addiction.
I think he just meant sitting down every day and just working, not sort of going, right, gonna have to chuck another telly out the hotel window again. Here we go, endless.
Where's the hashish? That's a really good documentary. If you ever watched that documentary of that album being produced, but also I think we want to rush to solution. I think this is it's built into our human KPIs, especially with work. But why wouldn't you? Why would you want to spend more time doing something you need to? And each and every day, you and I both did the same thing. We write our lists and we tick a lot of stuff off. The small stuff is often the non-creative stuff. It's that menial type stuff. You tick it off quickly, but that juicy work, that stuff that requires more than just, look at it, tick it off, that's the hard work. And I think that's what we can often shy away from because we want answers immediately rather than realizing there's a gray space here that we're not sure of the answer. So you've just got to do the work. It's a hard sell because I try and sell that. People say, well, when's the breakthrough? And I go, well, I'm not sure. We're just going to keep at it. And if you do, it always comes, but there's a bit of hard work. Yeah, times when you don't agree and you sort of sit in that grey space, and I call it valley, which Mike Parsons put me onto as well, that term.
That's
so to do the work.
Yeah, and actually, I wasn't quite thinking it that way. I was thinking it actually as quite the solo activity of being creative and the hard work needed to progress something. But you're right. The hard work when you're collaborating within a team or an environment like that, where it's hard work, and as you say, you go through those dips and valleys on the route to something brilliant. It isn't a linear path, I think, and so it requires that sort of hard work and application and sticking to it.
So, in the spirit of sticking to it, John, who is your next guest from our Maniguesto tree?
Well, we're going to stick with creativity as a theme. This is Tiffany Markman, who gave us probably one of our most memorable Maniguesto phrases, which is, don't be an insular arsehole or asshole. And I would tend to say arse. But that's because I'm British.
Yeah, I'd say ass as well.
Arse. Yeah. Okay, so don't
American audience ass, spelled A-S-S. So English and Australians would say arse, A-R-S-E. Anyway, phonetic.
So in the interests of balance, Tiffany Markman said, "Don't be an insular asshole," or "Don't be an insular arsehole." Either way, the sentiment behind this was that for you to really tap into your creativity, for optimal creativity, it is about surrounding yourself and accessing things that perhaps sit outside of your normal boundaries. So mix with people who've got different beliefs to you that you don't agree with or don't understand. Surround yourself with different stimuli that might be different to what you'd normally go for. And she gives examples, if you're predominantly visual, to listen to stuff that's auditory. And so you bring in different stimuli, and that then creates that sort of melting pot. So it's tapping into the unfamiliar, whether that's people or ideas or stimuli, and that as being a route to widening your abilities to be fantastically creative. So you've got to be curious in the first place, and then you've got to get uncomfortable to some degree in then reaching out and looking at and being with things that you don't feel comfortable with or agree with.
And I always think if you meet a really interesting person at a party or a function or an event or something like that, they've got a really interesting backstory, like they've had a really interesting life, and you think, oh, wow, your job's cool. And then you go through that backstory and they have not been an insular arsehole. You know, the arsehole, you could take that out. It doesn't necessarily mean if you're not insular, you're an arsehole, but you know what I mean? The sentiment, they've had a really interesting life. So I always think, you know, interesting people do interesting shit. And we look at those people and go, oh, wow, isn't that cool? Where'd you get that from? Because they're out of their mental comfort zone and maybe the physical one as well, each and every day, doing something that I guess scares them a little bit.
Yes. And I think we've often seen repeatedly that this idea that you've got these inverted commas, I'm doing the rabbit ears, geniuses, were polymaths, that they would turn their attention to everything. You know, it would be science, it would be 1 minute, it would be the arts the next, it would be history, it would be psychology, whatever it was. They would have a curiosity and interest in a wide range of things and would seek to learn more about those. So again, that's that sense of not knowing, which for people can be uncomfortable. They throw themselves into that.
And Dr. Anthony Simcoe, one of our previous guests, said a very similar thing, be like Bowie, because Bowie kept reinventing himself and doing different things. And he said one of his favourite people he met when he went to NIDA, National Institute of Dramatic Arts, their first conversation was about quantum maths or something at a drama school. He said everyone else talked about drama. This guy was thinking about quantum maths or along those lines. And he said he's done so well. He's probably done better than anyone with what he's gone on to produce and the career he's had in the creative industries. And you probably wouldn't align that interest in quantum maths with being a great scriptwriter.
And I think Anthony introduces the idea of the multi-hyphenated polymath as well. Is that right? Which for me, I
can't remember, but I'll run with that.
Hey, yeah. Coming back to you, Simon, who's next on your list?
I've gone for Dr. Barbara Doran, and her one was draw, use your hands. And I think it's the first time we've had a guest says do something physical with your hands. And like when you make, and I'm sort of got my hands up in front of the screen, like I'm sort of creating something out of clay, just for listeners at home. When you do something in a tactile sense, again, you send messages all up and down your arms into your brain, and you get different neurons firing away, different parts of your brain's connecting, which is why when let's say you have a tradesman come around to your house and they're trying to explain something to you, they'll draw it out, they'll sketch it, they'll move stuff around, they'll look at things, they'll reconfigure. They don't go to their laptop and do all their thinking there, because that's a very linear way of thinking, I like to say. So how can you be more tactile, use your hands, but also think around how can you move, how can you use your other senses, how can you listen, how can you, again, curious with different things that are going, how can you try new things? But I like this hands, John. Do things with your hands, and not even necessarily draw, but bring something into the world outside of your keypad.
So tradespeople, though, they tend to use their hands by sort of putting one under their chin and then taking a sharp intake of breath and going, that is going to cost you. and then I use my hands because I put my head in them.
Tell them to fuck off.
And go, it can't cost that much again. I don't care if you draw me a picture. It's still expensive.
I think putting the hand on the chin, I watch my father-in-law does it, who's a retired tradesperson, but he can do anything. He can literally do anything. He just stops and looks, and he thinks, and he starts to move things around and sketch, and the answer comes from moving and sketching and playing with things. So it very much goes to that piece that Barbara was talking around. We do all of our thinking through the screen. And again, not knocking screens. I sit here, a big chunk of a day as well when I'm not out and about, but just be open to sort of bringing in some more tactile things to your thinking.
Yeah. And I'm sure as you do, Simon, I know you do, it's very visual and graphical. Often the breakthrough for me will come when I have moved from thinking in my head to what I might be typing out on screen to then coming to a piece of paper and sketching actually a room and how I expect people to move in that room or what the wall visuals are going to look like. And that's the moment where suddenly I get a different sense of what I'm trying to create. But it has to come through that analog medium of actually pen to paper, to sketching, to doing something like that. I haven't quite got to using Play-Doh and plasticine yet to create what's going to happen. I could do that, of course. Yeah.
You just use whatever you like to use. But then when you draw, there's two things that are happening. One, you're creating a mirror back to yourself or a new framework for thinking. And you've also got the process of the drawing. So there's two things happening. So you're giving yourself something new to engage with, but also the process doing the drawing is sending messages up to your brain, which you wouldn't have had earlier. So they sort of fit together like that. You've got the artifact, but then you've also got the activity. And then the moment you create the artifact, you've got space, you've got vision, you've got 2D, 3D.
And it's amazing how well that image stays in my mind over a bullet point list of what I think I need to do for a particular event or session or workshop or whatever. I can easily bring back what I drew over what I wrote out in an agenda or something like that.
And look, we've shared this before. No one ever went and said, hey, you know what really stood out today? Bullet point 7, slide 18. That really got me. Eh? And again, we think in pictures. We remember in pictures. We remember about 65% of what we see as opposed to about 10% of what we read. So again, the science is on that. So Dr. Barbara Doran, thank you for sharing that one with us. And John, I am going to stand on this baseball mound and hurl this ball at you at speed, and you're about to swing. What are you going to swing at? Who's Alex?
I am going to use a Tim Vaughan-Hughes shaped bat to smash it out of the park.
Ooh. Something for our American audience. Hello, California.
Cricket bat for those in the UK. Particularly with Tim, I think. Yeah, Tim. Yeah, he's a nice willow cricket bat, I think. I'd used to knock this one back to you. So Tim, as you may remember, was a delightful guest, and he was the one who'd been in film production and worked with Monty Python through the years and had some fantastic stories that he shared.
No small claim to fame, like Monty Python. Let's just acknowledge that.
It was a proper...
There's dropping names like you wouldn't believe, like Laurence Olivier, and like his Rolodex was massive. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was a fantastic opportunity to sit with somebody genuinely being sort of amidst the greats, as it were. But his Maniguesto point came back to a quote that he attributed to Samuel Beckett, which is fail again, but fail better. We've talked about failure many times in this podcast, not notably our own. And what we realize is that's all wrapped in that thing of when you're creating or working together with teams or whatever, trying to create something, experimentation, testing, and failure is a natural part of that. And Tim framed it more around people having the right to fail. That's okay. It's how we get better. And it's just that learning opportunity that people have. So for organizational speak, corporate speak, we'll often talk about psychological safety, but there's a kinship to that, which is create an environment where people can trip up and it doesn't matter. People support them, praise them when it goes right, and accept that it's not always going to go quite to plan. And that's okay.
And a good way to think about it, and I talk about this all the time because we all have a little hang up around doing something which doesn't work and all that type of stuff. But it's almost stepping back and go, before we get something that will work, we need to think of what's all the little fails we can do now to test, to get rid of all the things, the big fail when we launch. So it's that thinking, what's the stuff we're unsure about, which is maybe 50% of the project. Let's get some experiments going. Let's get some testing done. We'll find out the things which don't land as we thought. Now we can fix them. So by the time we're ready to launch, let's say, we've ironed out a bunch of the creases already. So by failing early and failing often and failing mindfully, which is someone else's quote I've heard, I can't claim that for my own, you remove the big sort of mistakes at the end. So I really like that, Just be comfortable with little fails. With fail fast, it seems like you're running into a brick wall every day and go, hey, don't worry. Hey, I'm going to do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, so we should emphasize that, of course, fail again, fail better means that not to be failing in an operating theatre or the cockpit of a plane. That's what the training simulator's for. So, yeah, let's think about where we fail.
That's a great analogy, though. Where can you make these mistakes risk-free or with minimal risk, or you're doing it, which is that cockpit analogy there. Where can you do that? And if you crash, it doesn't matter. However, every time that you fail, you learn, you're ready to rumble next time. And as an example, I do a lot of storytelling, and we always think around how can you find a little narrative in your presentation. And a really good way to do it is, okay, you're going to write it out. You're going to share it with someone in the room. You don't stand at the front of the room and crap yourself. You just do it with one other person. And we speak about this all the time. They give you the feedback. Here's what I like about what you're saying. Here's some better ways I think you could make that better. So all of a sudden, there's zero risk. You do this 2 or 3 times, you end up with a really nice little story. So you've had lots of little fails, but each one's made you a little bit better. So it's a nice way to de-risk the room, de-risk the vibe, make people psychologically safe, and get a lot better in the process.
There we go. So thanks to Tim there. Yeah, we like that one. And it's found a spot on the Maniguesto tree.
Now, John, I've got one more, and I think it wraps up pretty much the ethos of this show. And also it's the golden thread, I would say, that goes through all of our guests. And it's entrepreneur, startup queen, Jemma Enright, and stay curious, which I think just connects every episode we've had, guest-wise, even our own things. So I think curiosity is pretty much the gateway drug for the success that all of our guests have had. And I think it's something we can all be a lot better at without too much effort, which is what I like about it.
Yeah, I think, well, we've got it in the exit tagline, as we say at the end of this show every time, which is about staying curious and making stuff, etc. But yeah, curiosity, that's what brought me into this whole thing in the first place. I was trying to find out how you could have people, teams, organizations just tap into that curiosity a little bit more frequently and see where that takes you. Often to good places.
Well, I think it's a nice spot. We've come to a good place, and it's the end of the show. Big thank you to all our guests. And as we said in the last episode when we did this version, it's been like a little mini PhD I never thought I'd do, and it's really forced me to dive into some topics and subjects, especially the backgrounds of our guests and what sort of makes them tick, what they think about. And I've literally gained so much from that and just become a much better thinker myself and be able to share some much greater content when I'm out and about, just with some of these great insights from other people. So big thank you to all of our guests. Now, someone asked me the other day, John, well, how do we get in contact with you two guys? So we have a website, occupationalphilosophers.com. On that website is where you can get in contact with either John and I separately or together. If you think, they sound interesting and would like to do some work with them, please get in touch. And watch out in the new year, we're going to rejig our Instagram account, and that's going to be awesome.
Are we? That's the first I've heard of it.
I've made this right. Manifestation, like surely as one of our guests said, manifest success. So in the new year, we're going to have an awesome Instagram account as well.
On that note then, Simon, should we sign off with our usual mantra, which is to have people stay curious, have fun, make stuff, play more, but
the world is amazing. Make sure you go out and date life.